In this lecture, I'll provide an overview of ethical and professional standards as described in the CFA Level I curriculum. Ethics represents 15% of your overall CFA exam, and with a total of 240 questions, that means that 36 questions will be from ethics. So clearly this is extremely important and hence should not be underestimated. The ethics topic has 3 readings. The first is an overview reading, which basically is telling you about the code of ethics and providing an overview of the standards of professional conduct. And in this lecture, we will basically go over the first reading, which is relatively short. The second reading is the heart and soul of ethics in level 1, and I would say that out of the 36 questions, most probably 30 to 35 questions will be from this reading. No other reading in the whole CFA curriculum has as many questions showing up on your actual exam. So clearly this is something that you need to spend a lot of time on, and there are several candidates who might do very well in the remaining 9 topics, but if they do not do well in ethics, then the result might not be good. So I recommend that my students study this at the beginning of the CFA course and keep studying it throughout, and then again study it very hard at the end of the course. So do not underestimate this. And then finally, the third reading in ethics is on global investment performance standards, generally referred to as GIPS. This is a relatively short reading at level 1, but again, you should do it and understand the main points. Then at CFA level 3, we get into a lot more detail on GIPS, but we will worry about that later. At this stage, when I just want to clarify a couple of terms that you will see over and over in this reading, you will see the curriculum constantly referring to members and candidates. What does this mean? Members means members of the CFA Institute. So people who are part of the CFA program or have completed the 3 exams and sign up to become members of the CFA Institute. So they basically are paying an annual fee and agree to certain terms and conditions. So they are referred to as members. If you have just enrolled for the CFA Level 1 exam, then you would classify as a candidate. So a candidate is somebody who has signed up for the exam but isn't necessarily a member yet. Now, all the ethics that we'll talk about and the standards that we'll talk about in the CFA context apply to both members and candidates. So I will use these terms interchangeably. As far as ethics and the standards are concerned, they apply to either one. So now let's jump into the first reading, which, as I mentioned earlier, is an overview reading titled Code of Ethics and Standards of Professional Conduct. This reading has 3 learning objective statements, and if you are new to the CFA curriculum, I'll just give you a quick overview of what this term means. For every reading, there are learning objective statements that are outlined at the start of the reading. So these are learning objectives that you as a candidate or you as a student must make sure you have mastered before you take the exam. And a good thing to do is at the end of every reading, go back to the learning objective statements and test yourself as to whether you have understood those learning objective statements. I've already talked about this concept of members and candidates. So I'm assuming that you have enrolled for the exam and hence you would classify as a candidate. So learning objective statement number 1 says that you must understand the structure of the CFA professional conduct program and the process for enforcement. This essentially means that the standards that we'll talk about and the code of ethics that we'll talk about, if for some reason this is violated, what process must we go through? If, for example, so what is it that triggers an investigation? If you are a candidate enrolled in the CFA program and you do something that violates the standards, the CFA ethical standards, one way that an inquiry might be triggered is if you actually do a self-disclosure. So you write to the CFA Institute basically admitting that you've done so and so, that is, you've done something that is not right. So this is one way in which an inquiry can be triggered. Another way is a written complaint from somebody else. So let's say that your boss is a member of the CFA Institute and he determines that you have violated one of the standards. So he might send in a written complaint to CFA Institute, and that will prompt a inquiry. If there is evidence of misconduct, so there is a news report in which you are mentioned as having done something unethical, that might also trigger an inquiry. And the one that is probably most frequent for candidates is where an exam proctor sends in a letter to the CFA Institute indicating that you did something that was not right on the exam. Now, as an example, when you are taking the exam and it is announced that you must stop writing, even if you spend 30 extra seconds to fill in your answers, the proctor is not going to argue with you. He will just let you know that he will be sending a letter to the CFA Institute. So that will trigger an inquiry. So these are the 4 fundamental ways in which inquiry is initiated. So what happens after the inquiry is initiated? The CFA Institute assigns a designated officer. So this person will be a member of the CFA Institute, might even be an employee at the CFA Institute. So he conducts a detailed investigation. And in this detailed investigation, after the investigation, he might determine that no sanctions are necessary, that actually what you did was not really a violation of the ethical values or the standards. Now, that's one possibility. Another possibility is that he issues a cautionary letter. This means that you basically receive a warning, and probably what you did was marginally wrong and based on maybe an honest mistake, and you get a letter that you should not do this again. And finally, the most serious one is where the designated officer proposes disciplinary sanctions. So he believes that what you did was a serious violation, and he proposes sanctions such as removing you from the CFA program, barring you from taking an exam for the next 4 years, or something to that effect. Now, as a candidate, it is possible that you do not accept the proposed sanction. So you believe that the sanction is unfair or unjust. You do have a right to challenge it. If you do challenge, then the matter is referred to a panel composed of members from the Disciplinary Review Committee, also referred to as the DRC. Now, this Disciplinary Review Committee basically then has the responsibility to look at the report prepared by the designated officer, maybe do some more research and figure out whether or not the proposed sanctions are justified. And the decision of the Disciplinary Review Committee then will hold. Okay, so that covered fundamentally 1A, or 1A being the first learning objective statement in reading 1. What are the second and the third learning objective statements? The second learning objective statement from reading 1, classified as 1B, is as follows. What you must be able to do is state the 6 components of the code of ethics, and you must know the 7 standards of professional conduct, which is what we are going to do. And then you must explain the ethical responsibilities required by the code. So the short form for code of ethics is code, and the short form for standards of professional conduct is the standards. So you need to understand your ethical responsibilities, and you also need to understand that each of the 7 standards that you will learn has multiple subsections. Now this whole area we will continue and we'll study in a lot more detail in subsequent lectures. So as part of this overview, I'll not spend much time on this because this will be covered later. What we will do here is understand the code of ethics. The way you can think of ethics is that there are 6 statements here which are fairly general, and I would strongly recommend that you read these several times. In my opinion, these statements are not very testable, but the code of ethics provides the philosophy or the ethos or the fundamental thoughts behind the standards, and it is the standards which is where you are most likely to be tested. So again, best thing here would be to read these, and you'll notice they are fairly general, which is why it's hard to test based on these. Nevertheless, read this several times. So I will actually read with you. The first item is that you must act with integrity, competence, diligence, respect, and in an ethical manner with the public, with your clients, with prospects, employers, employees, colleagues, etc. So essentially, what we are saying is that you must act in an ethical manner. So fairly general, but the fundamental point is that you need to be ethical, and I'm sure you knew that already. The next one is that integrity of investment profession and client interest above personal interests. So when you are working at a brokerage firm, or if you are playing the role of an investment advisor, the integrity of your profession must come before client interests and any sort of personal interests. And you will see several standards where this ethical value is elaborated on. So here again, basically, you must act with integrity. So that's the fundamental point. 3. Reasonable care, independent professional judgment when conducting analysis, making recommendations, taking investment actions, and in other professional activities. So the fundamental point here is that you take reasonable care, you be independent, and basically make sure that you are not biased in any way when you are making any sort of a professional judgment. Not only are you supposed to be ethical and do the right things, you are also supposed to encourage others to be ethical. So practice and encourage others in a professional, ethical manner, reflect credit on themselves and profession. So the point here is that not only do you do the right thing, you also encourage others to do the right thing, and that's important. So if you are in a supervisory role, this becomes even more significant, where you need to make sure that all your employees are also following the code of ethics and doing the right thing. You must promote integrity and uphold the rules governing capital markets. And finally, you must maintain, improve professional competence and strive to do the same for other investment professionals. So point here being that just because let's say that you did your MBA 10 years ago, the world of finance has evolved considerably since, and it is your job as a professional to keep your knowledge up to date so that you are in the best position to serve your clients. A nice analogy would be a doctor who might have done his MBBS or MD if he's in the US about 20 years ago. Now, for this person to continue practicing, he needs to remain up to date with the field of medicine. Same analogy for investment professionals. No matter when you studied, you need to remain up to date with the latest trends and strategies in your profession. And that is actually expected of you as if you are following the CFA Code of Ethics. So those were the 6 code of ethics, and as I've said, I want you to read those several times. Not immensely testable, but you will see those ethical values reflected over and over in the 7 standards of professional conduct. And whenever you hear the short form, the standards, basically we are talking about these 7 standards. I would strongly encourage you to actually learn these 7 standards, and a quick short form that I would suggest for you. This is a simple little trick that I use. So just put this down: PIDDICR, and just remember the 7 standards. Number 1 is professionalism, then integrity of capital markets, duties to clients, duties to employers, investment analysis, recommendations and actions, conflicts of interest, responsibilities as a CFA Institute member or CFA candidate. So you should just memorize these 7 terms. Now, in the next few lectures, we are going to get into details of each one of these standards. But here I'll give you a very brief overview. So the standards related to professionalism essentially will imply that you must act in a professional manner. Integrity of capital markets implies that whatever you do, one of the most important things is to uphold the integrity of capital markets. If you, as an investment advisor or a research analyst at a brokerage firm, do something that hurts the integrity of capital markets, you are hurting not just yourself and your firm, it is the sanctity of the capital markets that will take a hit. And hence it is so important to ensure that you understand the implications of anything that you do. Next item is duties to clients. So here a core point would be that if you are taking any action, what are your duties to clients? And this will also help outline where duties to clients relate to maybe overall integrity of capital markets. Next comes duties to employers. So as an employee at, say, a mutual fund, what is your duty to your employer? Investment analysis, recommendations, actions. So what are the guidelines? What must you keep in mind when you are doing investment analysis or coming up with recommendations? How do you deal with conflicts of interest? So if a client of yours gives you a gift, are there any conflicts of interest? And if so, how do you deal with them? And then finally, as a CFA Institute member or as a candidate, and as I mentioned earlier, most probably this is where you stand, the rules essentially are more or less the same for members and candidates. So what are the responsibilities? This is also extremely important.